Babylon. The royal palace hall is packed. 1,000 nobles drinking, laughing, toasting. At the center of the table, gold and silver cups are passed hand to hand. The same cups that, decades earlier, a Babylonian army had ripped out of Jerusalem's holiest temple. King Belshazzar raises one of them and toasts to gods of gold, silver, bronze, and stone. And that's the exact moment a hand appears. No body, no owner, just a hand floating in the air, slowly writing on the wall lit by torchlight. The king sees it, and his legs give out. Nobody in the hall can read what it says, but outside the walls, an entire army is already on the move, rerouting a river to slip into the city unnoticed. That army isn't Babylonian. It's not any people those drunk nobles in the hall would recognize as a threat. It's coming from a young kingdom across the eastern border, a kingdom that just decades earlier, almost nobody in Babylon took seriously. That night, this kingdom changes size forever, and today it goes by a different name. You know it as Iran. That kingdom was called Persia, and the man commanding that army outside Babylon's walls is called, in the biblical text itself, God's chosen instrument. Today, the country born from that empire is seen as a threat to the world. What happened in between? Between a king described as God's anointed and a country now trading strikes with the United States is one of the most dramatic stories of the ancient world. And almost nobody tells it in full. It actually starts with a failed assassination. A grandfather who dreamed his own grandson would overthrow him and ordered the baby killed. Hold on to that detail. It'll make sense soon. Centuries before the scene you just watched, a prophet named Isaiah writes something almost unheard of in ancient literature, the name of a king who hasn't even been born yet. Cyrus, the text says, "My shepherd, who will accomplish everything I please." And further on, something even more extraordinary. God calls this same Cyrus Mashiach. The Hebrew word Messiah comes from anointed. It's the only time anywhere in the Hebrew Bible that title is used for a foreign ruler. A man who never worshipped Israel's God, who didn't even know this prophecy existed. Scholars have long debated the exact dating of this section of Isaiah, whether it was written decades before Cyrus was born or closer to his own time. It's a serious academic debate, not a fringe theory. But even by the most conservative estimates, the text predates his reign by over a century. So who was this man the prophecy described, generations before he even existed? To understand Cyrus, we need to go back almost 1,500 years before he's born. Around 2000 BC, a large group of peoples originating in Central Asia start spreading out. One branch heads toward India. Another settles over the following centuries on the plateau that is now Iran. The Iranian peoples, including the Medes, the Persians, the Parthians, and other smaller groups. They don't arrive as one organized kingdom. They spread out, settle in different regions, form separate centers of power. The first to rise to prominence are the Medes, further north with their capital at Ecbatana. They're the ones, in fact, who helped destroy the Assyrian Empire, decades before our main character is even born. The Persians at this point are vassals of the Medes, a subordinate people, not the center of power. It's within this Persian people, in a region called Parsa, that the Achaemenid dynasty is born, Cyrus's family. He starts out as king of Anshan, a small kingdom within that territory, and technically subordinate to his own grandfather. And here's the detail I asked you to hold on to. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus's maternal grandfather, the Median king Astyages, had a dream he interpreted as prophecy that his newborn grandson would grow up and overthrow him. Terrified, he orders the baby killed. The man assigned to carry it out doesn't have the stomach for it, and secretly hands the baby off to a shepherd who raises him as his own son far from the palace. Years later, Cyrus discovers who he really is, and the prophecy comes true exactly the way Astyages feared, just by his own hand, the moment he chose to spare the child. In 550 BC, Cyrus rebels against his own grandfather, defeats the Median army, and does something that changes everything. Instead of simply swapping one ruler for another, he unifies the Medes and the Persians under a single command. This is the real birth of what the Greeks would later call the Persian Empire, the name coming from Persis, the Greek form of Parsa, the land Cyrus came from. 6 years later, in 546 BC, He conquers the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, in what's now Turkey, ruled by the legendary King Croesus, famous for misreading an oracle that predicted that if he attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. The empire he ended up destroying in the end was his own. One target remained, the biggest one of all. If this story of betrayal, prophecy, and rise to power has you hooked, drop a like right now. It really helps YouTube put this in front of more people. And we're back in the hall where we started. Babylon 539 BC. The king on the throne that night is Belshazzar, but here's something almost no popular summary mentions. He wasn't, technically, the real king. The official king was his father, Nabonidus, who had spent nearly a decade living away from the capital, in a city in Arabia, leaving his son as a kind of regent. That's not just from the Bible. Independent Babylonian sources, like the Nabonidus Chronicle, confirm that extended absence. And there's another factor that helps explain what's about to happen. Nabonidus was unpopular with Babylon's own priesthood because he promoted the cult of a moon god called Sin at the expense of Marduk, the city's chief deity. There was religious unrest on the inside, even before any army showed up on the outside. At that banquet, the hand appears, writes on the wall, and nobody can interpret it, until Daniel, a Jewish exile, is brought in. He reads 3 words, men numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel weighed. You have been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Peris divided. Your kingdom will be divided between the Medes and the Persians. That same night, Belshazzar is killed. And outside, Cyrus's army enters the city with almost no resistance, rerouting the Euphrates River, which ran under the city walls, to cross without needing a long siege. Archaeology backs up what the Bible suggests. Babylon fell with barely a fight, a tired, internally divided city, welcoming a new ruler almost like a relief. Cyrus doesn't arrive as a destroyer. To a lot of people inside those walls, he arrives as a liberator. One of Cyrus's first acts after taking Babylon is freeing the peoples who had been held captive for decades. Among them, the Jews exiled since Jerusalem's fall to Babylon. He authorizes their return and funds the rebuilding of the temple. According to the book of Ezra, he returns more than 5,000 sacred objects that Nebuchadnezzar had looted decades earlier. Worth an important historical nuance here. The rebuilding doesn't happen right away. Zerubbabel leads the return, but the project faces opposition from neighboring peoples and stalls for years. It's only resumed and finally completed under another Persian king, Darius I, nearly 2 decades after Cyrus. In 1879, archaeologists find among the ruins of Babylon a clay cylinder covered in cuneiform writing. On it, Cyrus describes his policy: returning peoples to their homelands, restoring religious cults, ruling through tolerance instead of repression. Today, that object is often called the first human rights document in history, and it's on display at the British Museum to this day. A point of honesty that adds to the story, rather than taking away from it. That specific label is a modern reading, popularized mainly in 1971, when the Shah of Iran used it as a central symbol during the celebration of 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, a deliberate political move, tying his own government to Cyrus's legacy. That doesn't undo Cyrus's real, well-documented tolerance. It just shows that how we remember great empires is sometimes shaped as much by the present as by the past. 200 years after Cyrus's death, the empire he founded is the largest the world has ever seen, covering, at its peak, more than 40% of the world's population. And then, in 331 BC, a young Macedonian king named Alexander faces the Persian army, commanded by Darius III, at the Battle of Gaugamela. Darius is defeated, flees, and doesn't die fighting the Greeks. He's assassinated by his own provincial governor, in an internal betrayal, while still trying to escape. Alexander advances to Persepolis, the ceremonial capital built as the jewel of the empire, and burns it down. There's a genuine historical debate about why. Some ancient sources, like Diodorus, describe a calculated act of symbolic revenge, paying back the burning the Persians had caused in Athens over a century earlier. Others, like Plutarch, tell a very different version, an impulsive act during a wine-soaked party, allegedly egged on by an Athenian courtesan named Thais. Modern historians don't agree on which version is more accurate. What's certain is the outcome. The empire Cyrus built on tolerance and careful administration ends in ashes, literally, at the hands of the man who conquered it. If you didn't know any of these details until now, drop a like. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. After Alexander, Persian territory passes through a succession of rulers. First the Greek Seleucids, then the Parthian Empire, which actually defeats Roman armies and blocks Rome's expansion eastward, and then the Sasanian Empire, which considered itself Cyrus's direct heir and rivaled Rome and later Byzantium for almost 400 years. In 651 AD, Arab Muslim armies conquer the Sasanians. This is the moment that changes everything. Over the following centuries, the population converts to Islam, and the old Zoroastrian religion nearly disappears. But there's an important detail about modern Iran's specific religious identity. The country's Shia majority doesn't come from that 651 conquest. It comes from centuries later, in the early 16th century, when the Safavid dynasty makes Shia Islam the official state religion, a deliberate political decision that would define the region's religious identity to this day, setting Iran apart from most of the Muslim world, which is majority Sunni. In the 20th century, we reach the part of the story that directly explains today's conflict. In 1953, a coup backed by American and British intelligence services overthrows Iran's elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized the country's oil industry, previously controlled by British interests. Shah Reza Pahlavi, who already reigned with limited power, comes out stronger, with direct American backing. Over the following decades, Iran becomes one of the United States' closest allies during the Cold War, a major buyer of American weapons, a strategic partner in the region. In 1971, the Shah himself organizes the celebration of 2,500 years of Persian monarchy at Persepolis, with world leaders in attendance, a public display of that closeness with the West. But that closeness comes with an internal cost. On one side, the Shah's regime ran a secret police force, the Savak, responsible for arrests and the repression of opponents, a fact well documented by human rights organizations of the time. Rapid modernization concentrated its benefits among urban elites, while part of the population, especially more religious and rural communities, felt Westernization was being imposed from outside, threatening the country's Islamic identity. On the other side, that same period brought real progress, expanded infrastructure and education, expanded rights for women, and a prominent geopolitical role during the Cold War, things that segments of the population, especially more urban and secular, still look back on with nostalgia today. In 1979, these tensions culminate in the Islamic Revolution, backed by a broad coalition that included both conservative religious groups and secular groups unhappy with the regime, overthrowing the Shah and installing, under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini, the Islamic Republic that exists today. Months later, Iranian students seized the American embassy in Tehran, holding dozens of hostages for 444 days. It's the formal diplomatic break between the two countries, a relationship that's never been fully restored since. The land Cyrus ruled is exactly where it's always been. What changed is who governs it, what it represents to the people who live there, and how the rest of the world chooses to remember its history. Cyrus never read the prophecy that carried his own name, never knew he'd be called anointed. He only knew one thing: conquer, and then govern with a tolerance nobody expected from a conqueror. The Persia he built became legend. If this video was worth your time, drop a like. That's what tells YouTube if a video's actually good. Subscribe. There's a lot more history like this coming. Thanks for sticking around.